A lot of times we think we know something and we don't really know, and there's actually a psychological principle and concept behind this thinking that we know something and we really don't. It's called the Dunning Kruger Effect. I have a video that I'm gonna share, but the post that I seen, which I will share after the video, effectively it was showing that all religions taught the same thing, teach the same thing, and that all the concepts are the same, and it's really based on compromise, on the wrong reasons to compromise. When we are looking at what people say, we need to make sure that they are informed. The people that we're listening to, we need to make sure that they are informed about what they are actually speaking on. Speaking from what we feel is not always right. Sometimes what we feel can come from a right place, and sometimes it can't. And so as we look into the Dunning Kruger effect, we want to keep in mind, just like I said, being mindful of those we listen to and what they say. All right, and I'll tie that all in at the end of my point.
On April 19th, 1995, MacArthur Wheeler robbed a bank with his face glazed with lemon juice, believing the juice would make his face invisible to the surveillance cameras. He thought so because lemon juice works as invisible ink on a piece of paper. Police broadcasted the security camera footage on the local 11 o'clock news, and just after midnight, Arthur was arrested. Incredulously, he said, "But I wore the juice!" Baffled by this reasoning, David Dunning and Justin Kruger, two psychologists, studied Mr. Wheeler and others like him. They came to the conclusion that people with low ability at a task tend to, paradoxically, overestimate themselves. This cognitive bias is known as the Dunning Kruger Effect. Let's look at this graphically, plotting one's confidence in your ability against one's actual knowledge in a field. As we learn something new, we are often highly confident because we know so little that as soon as we know a tiny bit, we think we know it all. Those who stop learning here maintain a false sense of mastery. Those who continue learning realize things are more complex and often lose motivation. And the more they increase their knowledge, the lower their confidence becomes. Many stop at this stage, thinking they've learned nothing. Only if we keep going can we regain confidence while getting better. And at the end, we will be full of knowledge and almost as confident in our ability as right after we started. In other words, if a simpleton, a good student, and a wise teacher were to have a public debate, this is how things could go down. The simpleton knows just a little bit, but is very confident and voices his opinions loud and without hesitations. The student knows more, but doesn't realize it because she lacks confidence. She keeps quiet. The teacher is confident, but understands how complex things really are. Hence voices his opinions with reservations. In the end, the simpleton wins the popular vote because he is so confident about being right, and people tend to trust certainty. Research from North America, Europe, and Japan suggests that culture plays a big role. From assessments of one's own ability to drive, we know that 93% of Americans think they are better drivers than average, while only 69% of Swedish think so. In Japan, on the other hand, people in general tend to underestimate their abilities as a strategy to see their underachievement as an opportunity to improve. Setting out on a journey of learning can be a daunting experience. What starts off as a leisurely stroll soon changes into an intense battle of willpower between you and an intimidating amount of knowledge.
All right, I'm gonna stop right there. But most of us think we know so much, and let me tell you, I used to think I knew so much until, like the video said, I realized how little I actually knew. But then that was the motivation to keep learning. If I could show you off camera, I have 2 3/4 bookshelves of books that I have either read or on my reading list, and that is a desire to know, to understand, so that way I can present points accurately. The point for saying all of this is I seen this picture earlier, and when I seen it, it just made me think of myself. It made me think of how much I thought I knew when I wasn't living for God, how much I thought I knew about life, how much I knew about God, how much I thought I knew about spirituality, when in reality I knew very little to almost nothing. And as the picture says, Buddha was not a Buddhist. Jesus was not a Christian. Muhammad was not a Muslim, which would be infuriating to Muslims. They were teachers who taught love. Love was their religion. And so this shows the lack of depth to me of knowledge of each and every belief system represented here. If there were more religions represented here, it would show the lack of knowledge. It would show the lack of depth. Buddha was not a Buddhist. That may be accurate because he was whatever the original Buddha was, whoever he was the Buddha. And so the Buddhists are those who are following the Buddha. Jesus was not a Christian. That is absolutely right, because Jesus was the Christ. He was the Messiah. He was the one that Christians are modeling after, modeling their lives after. And that's what we're going to get on our major point. And then it says Muhammad was not a Muslim. Now, I don't know who came up with this stuff, but who came up with that graphic, but Jesus was not a Christian. Muhammad was not a Muslim. People do not read this. They don't care to read it. This is my nurse's Bible. I don't know if it'll really focus in on it. And they're definitely not going to read the Quran. I actually have a Quran. I actually have 2 Qurans. In my search for wanting to know who God was, not even necessarily for the truth. I wanted to know God. That was my first and foremost thing, is I wanted to know God. I wanted to know if he was real. I wanted to know which was the right way, the way to get to know him best, and through supernatural means and people he had placed in my life, or he was bringing into my life. He brought me experientially to places where I could not deny that it was him guiding and directing me. And so when we look at that picture, when we look at this, Buddha was not a Buddhist. Jesus was not a Christian. Muhammad was not a Muslim. This really shows the lack of depth. This really shows, to use a very strong word, it shows our ignorance on these topics. Because anybody who asks a legit Muslim, if you were to ask them, was Muhammad a Muslim, they will tell you absolutely unequivocally, yes, he was a Muslim. If you were to ask them, now this is based off of what I have read, this is based off of what I have studied. Unknown to many Americans, the Quran is not the only book that Muslims go by, depending on their circles. They also have a book called the Hadith. Okay, but there's the Hadith of Bukhari, and this has a lot more of the narratives, where the Quran has a lot more of the commandments and instructions. And then of course we have our trusty Bible that has a blend of the two, in order to show how the commandments and everything play into our day-to-day lives, how people implemented them, how they failed to implement them, what the consequences were for not living by these divine principles and laws. And that's the thing, is when we look at life, there are laws and principles that we need to observe in order to stay safe. We look at the law of gravity. Unfortunately, you read horrible stories about people that went to the Grand Canyon, they got too close, wind blew, or they lost their balance, and what happened? Gravity, a universal law and principle, got a hold of them and unfortunately pulled them to their death. How horrible of a thing is gravity when it is not taken into account? How horrible of a thing is safety when safety is impeding on your fun, and when it is impeding on what you feel you can do? How horrible are these things, right? That's what we would think. That's if we were to take the same logic and reasoning that our society is using now about different life principles and different science points of science that are ignored for the sake of agendas. How horrible of a thing is safety when it is impeding on your fun and what you feel you can do. How horrible of a thing is gravity when it is impeding on your feeling of you can fly like an eagle. How horrible, right? But these are universal laws. These are scientific points. Gravity is a scientific point unless you are going to supersede it by the law of aerodynamics. That is how you supersede the law of gravity, such as like a bird. A bird can gain lift versus like a bat has to continue. It has to jump off of some place that is already high and get in the air. That way it cannot gain lift like a bird can. And so these are scientific points that people don't usually have knowledge of. And so when it comes to that picture, Buddha was not a Buddhist. Jesus was not a Christian. Of course he wasn't a Christian. He was the Christ. He was the anointed one. That's what Christ means. And even in its cultural context, it has a double cultural context. It has a Jewish cultural context and it has a Gentile cultural context. And you have to do the history readings and cultural readings of the time in order to understand it. So Christ was a title that could have been applied to the Caesar, which was the anointed one, which was the one who was chosen by the gods to lead. The Son of God was also a title used within Gentile non-Jewish circles. Caesar Augustus was called the Son of God because Julius Caesar, his adoptive father, I believe it was deified to be a god, and Caesar Augustus was adopted by Julius Caesar to be his successor. And so Caesar Augustus was called the Son of God, the son of Julius Caesar, who was deified to be a god. So you got to do the research, and this is where that Dunning Kruger effect comes into play.